How's it going?
Hey, how are you doing?
Oh, just splendid. Another day in my snowy paradise of
Oh yeah, you live. That's unfortunate. Sorry
yeah,
about that.
it's all right. You get enough exposure over time, and then it's all good.
Well, my father-in-law 40 years ago lived there for like 2 years, and he just perpetually bitches about no, even though it was 40 years ago, he still
Yeah, usually the
just
transplants don't do so hot, but
yeah, he was in mining, so he was a high voltage
oof.
electrician that worked in mining,
Okay,
and
I'll,
so
I'll give him that one.
yeah, all he tells us stories about frozen engines and having to put heaters in your diesel and to
Hmm.
keep the engines from seizing, and you have to run them or they freeze anyways. Hey, I don't remember. I do remember we spoke, but I don't remember where we left off and what you wanted to kind of continue with.
I mean, I suppose I could just ask for Robert's story generally because I'm
Yeah,
kind of
so just introducing, this
fascinated
is my
by it.
friend Robert Boylan. He is a theologian and he is a former Catholic. He's, or I guess you would call lapsed Catholic.
I mean,
That they
either
call
or.
them, where you're not a Catholic anymore.
I understand the indelible marks are still there, we might
And
say.
the way that I view it is he saw the light of truth
Mm.
as a younger man and embraced the restoration. So he can tell his own story.
What exactly do you want to know?
Um, I guess what did your early childhood and like the religious formation or like your family dynamics play out? Like,
Uh, Born and bred in Ireland, traditional Roman Catholic background, Catholic school, all that jazz. Spent 5 years in the Roman Catholic seminary studying theology in related fields. So I know Catholic theology rather well. I think I'm doing the LDS apologist who's actually read Robert Bellarmine and the Council of Trent.
yeah, I was gonna say,
Also, if you know Trent Horn from Catholic Answers, he's actually a
of
fan of
course.
a lot of my writing. He's
Yeah,
actually told me that.
interesting. Okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so 8 years, that means that you would have been almost ordained then at that point.
Oh, I wasn't studying for the priesthood. I was
Okay,
studying in
interesting.
seminary for like a degree. I was studying with seminarians.
Okay,
In fact, when
interesting.
I sometimes tutored Hebrew to the seminarians as well, part time. But yeah,
Yeah, that was one thing I think Travis had mentioned that you knew Greek and Hebrew, and I was like, well, I might be
and
boxing
a
you out of
couple
my
other
class a
languages.
little
Yeah.
bit there if I tried to debate anything. So just mostly going to be like question and answer type of stuff today, I'm sure. But if we get something that we want to like wrestle a little bit on, I mean, I'm fine with that. I'm relatively civil.
Just because I don't really know your background, you're a lifelong Roman Catholic.
Technically, yes. So I was raised in a some like not like totally devout household. But like Statue of the Guadalupe down the hall. Um, went to Mass Christmas, Easter, a few times in between. And so then, coming of age happens and I start asking the big questions, like why should I believe that the Bible is divinely inspired scripture? Should I, and like making
Your
these
big
sort of
questions are
philosophical cases.
a lot different than mine.
And would you consider,
Uh,
like, say, and you would be like would you consider yourself like, say, a conservative Novus Ordo Catholic, or would you like to say be a bit more trad, or
well,
where in the Catholic spectrum are you?
interestingly enough, I would say that a really well done Novus Ordo with Latin mass parts is really conducive to my personal faith experience.
Okay, so
But
but you
most of
would
the
be a
time,
mainstream Roman Catholic.
well, the most of the time, the thing is that it's only really well done in places that only do the traditional Latin Tridentine Mass.
Okay.
But I'm also an Eastern Byzantine Greco-Catholic altar server. So yeah, I go here and there and everywhere.
So in terms of your liturgy, you would be bi ritual in terms of attendance.
Yeah, I'd
Okay.
say generally,
No, I just want to know if you were a
Protestant.
mainstream Roman Catholic or super traditionalist. So
Yeah,
at least I know where, at
I
least I
lean
know
on
where
the
you're coming from.
traditionalist. The thing is that like the Novus Ordo reflects a lot of the ancient, especially when I'm looking at the liturgy of Saint John Chrysostom or Saint James. I'm seeing a lot of that replayed in the Novus Ordo that
Yeah, no.
isn't really present in the Tridentine Mass.
Well, when I was saying Novus Order, I was meaning more like, say, Vatican II Catholicism. But yeah, if you think the Novus Order is valid, it's a set of a contest. So yeah, that's
yeah, I get you.
Because I actually interact quite a bit with SSPX and others here in Ireland. So
interesting. So. I can kind of see that, though, I suppose. But yeah, so yeah, I guess would you say that you have a very academic relationship with the LDS Church and with the Book of Mormon, or?
Well, I work full time and have for like a number of years in like research organizations dealing with like Latter-day Saint history and scripture. So yes.
Yeah, so I guess because I just see a lot of things about like the Holy Spirit should be the primary giver of the source of why a Latter-day Saint believes in the Book of Mormon. And it seems like everything else is sort of secondary. So I was just curious to know if you share that.
Well, on the personal level, yes, but we do believe the Church is normative binding authority as well. So,
okay, cool. I suppose I've only watched like maybe half an hour of your content, just because Travis name dropped you a little bit, and then I was like, oh, interesting, so I went to check it, peruse out a little bit. I haven't gotten
so I take it as you haven't seen any of my stuff on Roman Catholicism.
I mean, it was a little bit. I think you were talking about one that kind of grabbed my attention, but I never got the chance to look into just because I've been going to like senior thesis orations and stuff for the Wyoming Catholic College here. It was is Thomism even a viable philosophy? I think it was something that you guys made a video on or were planning on.
Yeah, basically my friend Blake, who's a philosopher, but he was discussing it, but we hope to discuss the 5 ways in more detail in the near future.
Okay. Yeah.
It was part of a review of a book, A Catholic Engagement with Latter-day Saints, that just came out this year.
Okay, cool. I mean, you don't have to give me the whole spiel, but I guess I want to know the long story short, and then I can go watch more if.
Basically, Catholic theology dogmatized the Lombardian interpretation of absolute divine simplicity in 1215, and Aquinas just kind of built up on that. And there's problems when it comes to, say, the nature of God vis-a-vis scripture and revelation and other logical issues. But Blake kind of he's more into philosophy and more into, like, saying theology and exegesis. So he's the philosophy guy. So
interesting. Let's see. I guess I can just try to pull some more stuff.
Yeah, Blake, who was on there, his arguments would be more focused on philosophy. Mine would be focused on what I would like when it came to a Roman Catholic context, the historical and theological issues with Roman Catholic claims. So,
yeah, I guess because then something for me, I suppose, to wrestle with that idea just a tiny bit, is that I feel contingency becomes a bigger issue in the Latter-day Saint paradigm than it does for the Catholic Orthodox, depending on who you ask, I suppose. But divine simplicity does seem to be a very mainstream view.
Well, it's mainstream, but we would say that there's you basically would have to relegate a lot of scripture as mere anthropomorphisms and other topics as well, like the overwhelming body of evidence that the biblical authors do not believe in creation out of 9. Divine simplicity necessitates that. And the very fact that God, using the historical grammatical method of exegesis, and even some Catholics have conceded this, you basically would have to say the biblical authors may have believed God did change his mind, or he had contingent foreknowledge. But we do know, in light of, say, the Church's authoritative teaching, allowed Thomism, ADS, from Fourth Lateran, that takes the precedent, and that's the interpretive lens through which we read it. And I would say that's anachronistic. And examples of Catholics who are willing to concede that point would be Robert St. Genis, and who does believe God has contingent foreknowledge, and also Matthew Maynard, who's done a lot of translation of Garrigou Lagrange's work. He basically conceded the point when he was debating St. Genis on Reason and Theology a few years ago.
So I guess on the anthropomorphizing it, I guess then how do you all deal with like the psalmic structures of saying, like, we shall fly under his wing and stuff like that?
Because that's not historical narrative, that's poetical text.
I see. I see. Okay.
One, I'm sure you would agree with me, and this is not a smart aleck
Right.
comment. You approach text in terms of its literary genre. Like,
Yeah.
say,
Yeah. Yeah.
Exodus and Acts, that's historical narrative. The Psalms, like Psalm 91, I believe, where, God is depicted as a chicken, and Christ's metaphor in Matthew 23, or Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you like a hen gathers her chicks under a wing, from memory. They're metaphorical and poetical texts. It would be like the equivalent, like, say, have some Protestants trying to argue like justification, James 2's only vindication, because wisdom is said to be justified by her children in Luke 7. But that's clearly in its context using the poetical understanding of Sophia or wisdom and justification. It's not talking about the normative sense of the term. So,
Right.
so we would just say, like, using, again, just like using historical grammatical methods of interpretation, which is the literary sense of scripture, and even Aquinas and others would say that's the most important one. Analogical and other interpretations are important, but they're not as important as, say, the literal interpretation of scripture. We would just say, like, that's how you should drive most of your theology when you're approaching like things canonically.
So this is like slightly a side tangent, but do you consider yourself uh, to be an evolutionary theist or a traditional creationist type, if that even makes sense in
I,
the breakdowns, I
I don't, I don't,
suppose.
I don't believe that the biblical authors were really cognizant or really cared about, like, say, a lot of these issues. But in light of, say, my background, I also have a degree in anthropology, so I'm familiar with, like, say, the some of the science behind it. I would lean towards like theistic evolution, just because I just don't see very good evidence for, like, say, a very young Earth. There's genetic evidence and stuff like that, but I just don't believe the biblical authors cared or had this in view. So I'm not like concordist, where, like, going to try to, like, reinterpret Genesis in, like, say, modern science. I think Genesis is a temple text, and that's how it should be interpreted. I think it's anachronistic to read, like, say, younger creationism or theistic evolution into those narratives. So that's where I would fall in the purview.
So then I guess it seems, I don't know, this is sort of me
What about yourself? Just out of curiosity, since you raised the issue.
Yeah, I mean, more of a theistic evolutionist, just because it seems like the fathers are rather halfway one way or another. Like you'll see Augustine basically say that um, to describe the event of creation transpiring in 6 literal days is to actually undermine the value that it's giving the reader, right? Saying how the things are structured and how they're ordered.
Yeah, sure.
And then there's like early, even rabbinical commentary, because the issue is that we don't get anything before the time of Christ that's written down besides just the Tanakh. And so even them after the fact, they seem to say, well, yeah, this is just imagery. And so Genesis 1 through 11, by all accounts and all marks, critical scholarship or otherwise, seems to be, at least from what I've seen, and of course I am not fluent in Hebrew, but seems to be definitely not a literal interpretation. Now, some of the fathers, like Irenaeus, I think take as an assumption that it's literal, or he'll just describe it, but he's not talking directly about, like, oh yeah, you have to take this literally. He's just sort of like, well, when you see in these passages,
yeah, it does seem, though, like Irenaeus did think the Earth was about 10,000 years old, and I know, like, some people try to massage that, but I don't think they're being honest. Irenaeus would be more like when the creationist camp, and some of the other patristics would be as well. But
right.
I just don't believe, like, the biblical authors were really cared. It's more like, say, Yahweh is greater than these Babylonian deities. If you hold to some EPD view, I don't, but and so forth. But again, I just don't really believe the biblical authors actually had that in view. So, I'm not saying you're doing this, but, like, say, how some concordance trying to engage in the issue, I just think it's kind of anachronistic eisegesis.
Yeah, no, I think there's the other view that drawing from Peter's epistles saying, like, a day is but 1,000 years and 1,000 years but one day. And then they're like, okay, so actually it's like 40 to 60,000 years old, maybe.
Yeah. And it's obvious, like, it's a simile, right. It's, again, Peter, of course he's addressing creation, like in 2 Peter 3, for instance, like creation of water and stuff like that. But to try to argue, like, that, first of all, it's clearly a simile. It's like or as, and to try to read that back into Genesis and then the chronologies and stuff like that, it's No, I mean, I do believe like 6 literal days are in view in the Genesis account, but I don't think that's necessarily creationism. It's just like it's a temporal context. If you're familiar, like say some of the recent scholarship on that from like Walton and others, where Adam is seen as the high priest, he's the gardener of God's temple, and a host of other issues. That's what's in view there. It's not like it has to be 6 literal 24-hour days in terms of the actual creation of everything, but like from the biblical perspective, it's 6 24-hour days when a temple context. It's so yeah. I just believe like once you understand, like say the ancient Near Eastern background of Genesis 1 as well as 2 and 3, it doesn't force you to be in our creationist, I should say, as it doesn't force you to be a theistic evolutionist. I just believe that's when a different. I just believe it's anachronistic to read any of those perspectives into Genesis 1 to 3.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think like the modern Catholic Church, Vatican II, would even say like you can hold to either one of them, and that is sort of fine.
Yeah,
So
as long as you're not dogmatic and condemn the other to hell, they're allowable.
yeah, I'm usually
I think it would be
more in
fair
the
to
group.
say that I don't know about Francis, but I think it's fair to say that Benedict and JP II did hold to some type of theistic evolution, and that's the
Yeah.
functional position of at least the majority of the Catholic magisterium today.
Yeah, I think in America, it's somewhere around 3/4 of all Catholics believe in a theistic evolution.
Yeah.
I read the stats, but at any rate, yeah. So I guess, oh, what was it? Oh, yeah. So Travis, last time that we spoke, he'd kind of pointed at the notion that if you were to look at the plain history, you would just see Catholicism orthodoxy, basically. If I'm doing justification to that, saying that from the historical, you just see the New Testament and you see the early authors, the patristics, and then you see this continuing and continuing further and further. And he said that the case for the restoration of the gospel isn't something that you can merely appeal to these historical documents for. Travis, does that sound fair enough? Would you want to tweak that a little bit, or?
I'm not exactly sure what you're saying, so I'm not. I don't know if I understood what you're
Okay.
explaining. I don't
Yeah, so
recall what
you
I said, so I don't know what you're explaining.
no, you're
So
fine.
if you're suggesting that Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism are historically verified by a survey of the patristics and the writers post-biblical, no. But if you're saying that, I don't know what you're saying. So I
Like you wouldn't see like an apostasy as like a clean break. Like you
oh
wouldn't
yeah,
see
no, yeah, you wouldn't be able to say it happened at 406 CE is when the apostasy happened,
right,
right?
or like I guess to push that back even like AD 100.
Yeah, so I'm not, we don't, yeah, I don't think it's a tenable position to say that with the death of the last apostle, so assuming all 12 apostles were killed in the first century or died in the first century, however you want to view that, and that constitutes a clean break, and that their apostolic authority ceased immediately upon the death of the last apostle, with it not being passed to any successors. I don't think that's a tenable position. No, I don't think that you can just maintain that. And so my position is that the what you see is you see basically a taking power and vesting it in the bishops, who then are authorized to determine scripture and then also interpret scripture in light of an emphasis on tradition in order to support their interpretations that are not found explicitly identified in the biblical text. So any doctrine or idea that they want to accept as orthodox that's not explicitly identified, they can do so through a tradition or something like that. Yeah. But no, would I say that the church fathers were apostates? I wouldn't, and they lacked authority to baptize and things like that. No, I don't think I would maintain that position. But I do think that the um, the way in which the churches became structured, the changing of specific ordinances over time, predicated on the idea that these are based on interpretation or tradition, I think reflects an apostasy and a rejection of public revelation, which to me personally is apostasy.
And would you use ordinances there in the LDS term or in the Catholic?
You would call them sacraments. We would call them
Okay.
ordinances. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure. So I guess, Robert, what's your take on that same idea? Because I hear a lot of times like the missionaries will say like, the death of the last apostle and
Yeah, and I don't think that's a tenable
throw that
position.
in there.
Yeah, a lot of like LDS narratives vis-a-vis the apostasy and even church history as a whole. It's usually taken from like 19th century Protestant works, like Schaff and others. So it's kind of reflective of that. Now, how I approach things is much different than like most other LDS. Like, whenever I discuss things with a Catholic, in this case, it's kind of fortuitous because you're a Roman Catholic. I usually just like try to use their standards to show like even by their standards, an apostasy had to happen. And I'll tell you how. Like, Catholicism teaches that the deposit of faith stopped being added to with the death of last apostle. That's Vatican I, for instance, and other sources. That all the dogmas of the Catholic Church are in the deposit of faith, even if they were not scientifically proclaimed at that time, like the masses of propitiatory sacrifice, the Immaculate Conception of Mary, icon veneration, the various other Marian and Christological doctrines. The only allowable development of doctrine is what's called the not evolution of dogma, that's a condemned proposition, but there has to be a natural development, and it usually just means like appropriation of terminology and appreciation of the doctrine itself and its relationship to others. Pascendi Domine Gregis, paragraphs 26 to 28, for instance, kind of states this as the, like, say, the Council of Trent, that states all the dogmas and doctrines in the tradition of the church have been passed down by a continuous succession from the apostles down to the present era. And we do know that there are certain dogmas that Rome has dogmatically proclaimed as being part of this deposit of faith that were not apostolic at all, like the Immaculate Conception of Mary, the Mass's propitiatory sacrifice, and the Immaculate Conception. So one has to be inconsistent in their Catholicism to actually teach otherwise. So that's how I usually approach it. And I usually, probably because I'm actually familiar with, say, the ecumenical councils and other aspects as well, I kind of argue differently than most other LDS. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's for sure. When I'd seen, a touch of your work, I was like, wow. And I just gotta say,
yeah, and that's the issue is most Latter-day Saints are not going to be familiar with, most of what you guys just have had discussions about, the way you reference things and just know what you're talking about. Latter-day Saints are not familiar enough with Protestant or even especially Catholic. So Catholic doctrine and dogma is very systematized. Protestants have some very simplistic core beliefs that are easy to kind of grab onto. Yeah, it's easy to kind of, okay, we have the solas, and those are pretty simplistic to understand from a superficial level, certainly, and they're theologically dense, but obviously they're simple to understand. But Catholicism is much more developed because it's had centuries to develop a bunch of these different ideas. And so, so they'll say, death of the last apostle, because it's a simple way of doing it. But certainly, as Robert indicated, it's this idea of changes that occur in the centuries following that are.
Yeah, and also like the 19th century, there was like the idea, like, say, church history is this kind of a lineal thing, and it's like there's a very clean break. You can say, like, say, this is when this denomination was found. I'm sure if you're familiar with, like, say, anti-Catholic stuff, like the so-called Bettner list, like 1950, the Assumption was invented, or so-and-so year, that's when candles were invented, for church services. Like, that's a very naive view. Like, church history is like a very messy affair where there's like various clogs all throughout history. It's not this kind of whole lineal thing, So that was the very simplistic understanding of, say, ecclesiastical history, 19th century Protestants, and as a result, 19th century Latter-day Saints inherited. Although, fortunately, last couple of decades, it's actually getting better. More LDS are actually more familiar with, say, the ecumenical councils, the Acta by Richard Price, and other sources as well. But that's like the stuff that early LDS who commented on the Great Apostasy, like Talmage and Roberts, inherited. So.
And I guess, there is the other thing that a lot of, I guess the quick one or two liner sorry, that grammatically didn't make sense. Let me rephrase.
It's okay. English is actually my second language, so you can make as many English grammatical blunders as you want. I probably won't even notice.
Fair enough. So there's a lot of people who will use the one or two one-liner of like, well, we just have the more biblical structure. You see, God had these prophets. And so now that continues into the modern day. So what's your opinion of that? Do you think that that's like a good argument, or?
It's one of those things where like, I would agree, but like you would really have to flesh it out. I don't really like to say one of these one-liners because it's like people who cite a singular biblical verse as doctrine and kind of ignore like doctrine is like a matrix of ideas. It's no single verse or single idea. I mean, like, you know, as a devout Roman Catholic, you would believe in, like, say, the Vatican I, understanding the papacy. But even you would recognize, I'm sure, like, Peter
more than just Matthew 16:18.
Yeah, exactly. More to it. Like, yes, Peter is the rock, but there has to be more to it. Like, say, universal jurisdiction and the importance of the episcopacy of bishop. You know, and you would say, like, well, that's in the biblical data, at least implicitly, and it's there as well in the patristic understanding of the sensus fideium and so forth, you know. But it's a matrix, you know, it's not like, say, one gotcha kill shot, if you will. And that's kind of my perspective as well. It's like, yes, but you have to do more digging. That's why I don't like these kind of zingers, you know, one way or another, because you could. So I'm not a fan of like that kind of very superficial analysis. I mean, it's popular because like people, especially in our generation, you know, in our time, like it's the ADHD TikTok generation. You have to get it done in 10 seconds. If not, it's too long.
Yeah.
You've probably seen this, like, you know, and it's unfortunate, like it's a cancer that like
I've known it, I've been it, I've experienced it, I've heard it awfully parroted to me multiple times, dozens of times.
Yeah, you know, you probably get it from Protestants. You probably also heard it from your fellow Roman Catholics as well. You know, it's like really silly terms, like, you know, you know, like you don't believe in
outside of the church there is no salvation, and then I'm like talking about
no, exactly. It's like that. No, like Exegesis and Nihilum Salus is a very good one because like that is true from a Catholic perspective, but you have to dig a bit more. Like, what about baptism of desire? What about baptism of blood? What about, like, say, invincible ignorance? You know, which itself is not salvific. You know, it's not. But at the same time, like, how far can you actually hope? You know, and stuff like that. And there's a host of other issues as well. That even crazy set of Vacantis would agree with. Like, there's most Sadists, anyone would agree. There's some type of baptism of blood, baptism of desire. You can be still a member of the Catholic Church without like explicitly knowing you are, like, because of shared baptism and its self-efficacy, if you have the proper form and matter and so forth. You know, even like Eames, you know, Exegesis themselves from the Catholic perspective, you know, you have to do a bit more digging. So like, yeah, that kind of quick. It's like outside the church, there's no salvation. Even from a traditional Catholic perspective, it's like, yes, but
yeah, like. Well, I think Augustine and John Chrysostom are like the big pioneers in that idea, particularly too. So it's like, dude, if you think that this is like some 20th century thing, well, you got.
By the way, I don't think that's a 20th century thing. Like the issue is like,
I guess like one,
and
like
the Vatican II one understanding like organic development, you know, and that's the issue. But the idea, like, say, you don't have to be a full-fledged member of the Catholic Church and be saved. That's true. But there's other criteria as well. There has to be like some type of invincible ignorance. There has to be like, you know, various other circumstances as well, you know. But yeah, but it's just like to transpose that in the Catholic perspective. It's like, yeah, you can do sinners, and, you know, it's like they can be correct, but at the same time, you really have to do more digging, and especially from like an outsider's perspective, looking in from all perspectives, you have to do a bit more than just like do these kind of sinners, if you will. Right. Because like from a Catholic perspective, we would say like, yeah, but like public revelation ceased, you know, that's a dogma, and, you know, the apostleship was transposed in some way to the episcopacy, you know, and, you know, without the need for uppercase A apostles, you know, after the death of last apostle, you know, and that's what apostolic succession is in the modern era and so forth. So it's like, yeah, so
yeah, and I think
I'm just not a fan of these sinners.
So I guess I know this is awful, but I can only really deliver it in a zinger, and that's because of this foundation of belief from the Catholic Church, saying like, well, there were these prophets, and there was this new revelation now has since ceased. Right, the beginning of the letter to the Hebrews indicates that there was a time in which God spoke with prophets, but
the problem, though, is like if you were to use that verse, that would mean Hebrews is not actually inspired because it's talking about the Christ event, and Hebrews was written sometime in the 60s. What Hebrews 1-2 speaking about is like how the Christ event is the most important event in salvation history, but it can't be saying like public revelation has ceased because it's speaking about, like, say, how Christ has come. And so trying to absolutize that verse would mean that Hebrews is not actually theopneustos or divinely inspired. It's just like a historical narrative, similar to say the Didache or 1 Clement or the other works as well, like Shepherd of Hermas.
Oh, interesting. So you group it in differently than the
Yeah,
other
I
one?
never understand. I never understand the appeal to Hebrews 1 for that purpose. I don't
Yeah, Hebrews
really.
1 is not talking about, like, say, the
Well, I don't
cessation of
read.
public
I don't read
revelation.
the. Well, I don't read the verse that way. I've never have, and so I've
Interesting.
often not understood how it is read that way. It doesn't even seem to me to even support that idea, but it's often proposed that way. But see, as you guys were saying, using kind of zinger type ideas is that I think a lot of Latter-day Saints will say you lack structure, for example, because you don't have 12 apostles, and we do. Again, that's neglecting to understand that Joseph Smith was engaged in a restoration, and that includes restoring biblical ideas that are found all the way back through to creation. And so he wasn't just restoring the New Testament church. He was restoring all truths from the beginning of God interaction with the first man. So I think that that's often overlooked when they make those
Yeah, I
kinds of
think that's an
arguments.
important clarification, even a little
Yeah,
bit
I
for
mean,
me.
because like for today, for example, we have temple worship. Christians for thousands of years haven't had temples, and
Hmm.
yet one of the things that was restored was proper and appropriate temple worship, symbolism found in temples, and so we have cultic worship that we now engage in that's consistent with a biblical model of a temple and certain sacraments that are performed within a temple, as you would say. But so yeah, it's a superficial argument to just say your structure doesn't match our structure or something like that. Just as I think it would be, um, to argue that, we have apostolic succession from Peter to the current pope, so we win. It's just those are just
Yeah.
those require a lot more digging.
Oh, shoot, I just lost it. Oh, yeah. So I
But yeah,
guess,
but Hebrew, we were talking about Hebrews.
no, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I don't get that verse that way. So
Okay. Well, I guess, okay.
And not to engage in, say, picking Catholic against Catholic, but like many other Catholics would say, like Hebrews 1 is, and even Jude 3 cannot be used as sufficient
yeah, the
biblical
causative faith.
evidence of the cessation of public revelation. Also, like if you read Ignatius and the author of First Clemens, they seem to believe that they were inspired at times when they were writing their epistles. Like Ignatius claimed he was divinely inspired to know like only things a prophet would know in his epistle to the Philadelphians 7:1-2, for instance. He actually uses the same language other external authors would use to describe, like, say, Paul's inspiration and so forth. So, um, but all Hebrews is saying in its context, and you can even believe public revelation ceased at the end of the first century and still hold this perspective that the Christ event was the most important event in salvation history. But it's not saying like God no longer speaks through prophets and so forth, because even during the biblical times, like in Acts of the Apostles and so forth, they were apostles and prophets still operating and receiving revelation.
What did you say it was for the Philadelphians again?
Oh, Ignatius to the Philadelphians 7:1b-2. He claims that the Spirit was speaking to him, to reveal to him like something that could not be known naturally.
And that's a
Uh,
topic we had talked about previously, that some of the church fathers actually believed that they were authorized to continue with public revelation.
hmm.
That's one of the reasons I wanted Robert here, because he knows that material better than I do.
Yeah. Now, it's just interesting because I guess from our point of view, there are certain ways in which God can work, I guess, extraordinarily
Oh yeah, like
even
private
in the modern day.
revelations. Yeah, like private revelations like
Right.
Fatima in 1917 or Lourdes in 1858, as well as like miracles and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I know like Catholicism is not like say cessationist vis-a-vis like the gifts of the Spirit and other topics as well. So
Right. Um,
where the true divine, one of the true dividing lines still would be, we all agree like God can speak to individuals and like can speak, like, say, using the Catholic terminology, through private revelation. But even like then, like private revelation, even when it's like okayed, if you will, by the Vatican, like say Fatima or Lourdes or Medjugorje. Well, Medjugorje not yet, but like
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Let's not go there. But like yeah, yeah. But the others, like the one in Japan as well. even when they say, it could be a true revelation, it is true revelation, it's still not binding upon the conscience of people, because only public revelation, the tradition, uppercase T tradition, is binding upon the consciences of people. And even then, private revelation can't be used to help produce dogma or doctrine. But in our view, there is such thing as private revelation, but there's also ongoing public revelation. And because we believe, and Rome would believe the church is a normative authority as well, that's where the real where the rubber meets the road. Is there ongoing public revelation? And I know that you're familiar with that as a divine line. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I guess another big question is, how do you read the intuition that God wouldn't have abandoned any structure for a long time? So within the Catholic and Orthodox paradigms, you have the Tanakh that's revealed over time, and there's those concurrent teachers and prophets, and then you have the Greek Septuagint exclusive 7 Greek books, which sort of covers a lot of that, I guess, the silent period, as most Protestants would call it.
And I don't believe there's a silent period. I believe that's a Protestant misreading of Maccabean texts, but
and you can get more into that once I finish this bit. And, of course, the New Testament with the speaking there and the coming of Christ, and then the sort of reading and understanding and doing the sort of philosophical if this then what of the church councils, and from the Catholic position, from the magisterium. So I guess, how do you read the intuition that, because this structure just simply makes more sense, it seems more like what God would have, rather than there's this and then that's isolated and that's isolated, and then you get 1800 years before the Restoration.
Wait, and just so I'm clear, you're indicating that God abandoned an organization that he established for periods and then re-entered into a relationship with that organization through periods?
I guess something like that.
So there would have been, from just a straw man of the idea, from Genesis to Malachi, God was there. Then from Malachi to Matthew, no God. He's not there. He's abandoned them. And then from
100 years.
Then the 100 years of the first century, and then he's not there until Joseph Smith.
Right. That's what a lot of, I guess the lay Catholics always say. They're like, well, I think it's goofy anyway because.
I don't think God abandons.
I've sort of not really been a fan of that, but I
don't think God abandons us. So.
I'll let Travis answer after me, but I would say 2 things. One, when it comes to the institution Christ, would have, you could intuit Rome, and I know you know this, Vatican I is pretty clear, certain, the structure that they believe to be the essential component of the church, like the papacy and the magisterium. It's not something say that something developed or you intuit through revelation and you came up with the papacy. It's part of the deposit of faith. The Bishop of Rome singularly has universal jurisdiction. When he meets certain criteria, he can speak ex cathedra. There's also the indefectibility of the church as understood in Vatican I and other council. So it's not say something one intuits, from a Catholic perspective. And I'm sure I'm not as well versed in Eastern Orthodox ecclesiology, but I'm guessing they would argue very similarly as well with their structure as well. So it's not something say one, so when it comes to say intuition, it's it's the same type of argument from fittingness. You could argue, otherwise as well at times. And secondly, it kind of assumes what's in question, namely that these, in terms of the substance of the so-called early church, the opening few centuries, is substantially identical, numerically to either the Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox Church, depending on the questioner, and in this case, the Roman Catholic. And I would argue, even from by the standards of Roman Catholicism, the early church, in terms of its doctrine and its practice, do not believe in things that Rome has elevated to the position of a dogma. Not simply they did not have the terminology, but they did not actually have the concepts of certain beliefs that have been elevated to either a doctrine or a dogma. And, I could give examples say the Immaculate Conception of Mary or icon veneration and a host of other issues as well. So I would just say you could appeal to intuition, and you could appeal to say certain things like that, say fittingness and so forth. But I would just say, and this is where I depart from say some LDS, I just I don't believe in biblical proof texting for apostasy or restoration. I usually just like use the common standards we have and kind of show the inconsistency there. I would just say, like, once you study like patristic history and patristic scholarship, even from Catholics, there are problems with the Roman Catholic understanding of what has to be there for Roman claims to be true, and ergo, you would have to argue some type of apostasy, which is inconsistent with the Roman Catholic understanding of the indefectibility of the church since Pentecost.
Interesting. I guess what would be your main contentions there?
Like in terms of, say, beliefs, that I don't believe to be apostolic, that Rome claims to be apostolic, or
Yeah, I guess like what do you do?
the Immaculate Conception. No one believed in the early church that Mary was sinless. You do believe that you do have like early Christians believing that she was the new Eve, but they did not believe that she was created in the original righteousness of Eve, only that she undid Eve's yes to Satan. Like you even have like, say, early Christians like Irenaeus imputing sin to Mary in Against Heresies, where he also makes the Mary Eve parallel. You have also other people who say the only person who had no sin at all, even when they mentioned Mary, like Justin Martyr, it's Jesus. So you have an argument from Solons, but in this case, it's a meaningful argument from Solons if they believe this was an apostolic tradition. You have a host of other things as well that just don't make sense if the Immaculate Conception, in terms of its substance, was passed down, as Trent would say about all apostolic tradition, by a continuous succession throughout the ages. And yet, Pius IX, Ineffabilis Deus, elevated to the position of a dogma. And it's a primary object of infallibility. And as you know, if it's a primary object of infallibility, that's Rome is claiming the substance goes back to the apostles. The only allowable development, unless of course you want to be a modernist, and claim evolution of dogma, would be terminology and understanding and appreciation of the doctrine developed throughout the ages, But at the same time, there's no unnatural development of the doctrine. It's always been there in terms of its substance.
Well, I think it's really weird when you get into this particular conversation, because I think it does take a lot of research that I've done, admittedly partially. But it seems to be that like there's a exegetical case to be made, like with the description of her as the quejaritomene.
Oh, right? The perfect passive participle of karatao.
Right. And so there's stuff like that, and then there's like,
well, actually, no, maybe
the Syrian is very explicit about it, even though that's like 4th century.
Ephraim believed Mary became all holy at the Annunciation. He actually believes she was saved in a normative way, that she was actually a sinner who appropriated the salvific graces of baptism at the Annunciation. If you want, I'll actually send you a recent article I wrote on the topic of Mary as the new Eve, if you want.
That would be cool.
Yeah, I'll actually share it in the notes. But when it comes to Kekaratomene, sorry, Travis, if your eyes are going to glaze over here, that's the perfect passive participle form of karatao. It has the root word charis. And usually, like, say, I'm not imputing this to you, but like some Catholics will claim, like, this means that Mary was in a state of original justice, like Eve, since at least sometime before Gabriel appeared, because of its verbal form. And they try to argue this might be, at least implicitly and not explicitly, Mary was sinless, and you can go back and argue Immaculate Conception. The problem is, like, the very form of that perfect passive participle appears in Greek literature. I've actually done a lot of study in this, and I'll happily share my notes on this if you want. It appears, for instance, in Sirach 18:17. It also appears in Symmachus. He's a version of the Book of Psalms to describe a favorable person, but there's no Immaculate Conception or personal sinlessness there. And it also appears in John Chrysostom, who wrote in Greek. He's fragments on Proverbs chapter 25, and to describe like someone who has been like a favorable man, and a few other texts as well, like the Acts of Philip 48, that uses the perfect passive participle form of that as well. And there's a few other texts, like I once came across a Greek text that describes the author of the Gospel of Matthew being, as a child, Kekartomenes, which is the masculine form, basically, of that. And even, like, say, the earliest Christian interpreters who did have a very high view of Mary, like Origen. I know he was a heretic, but he had actually a very high view of Mary. Like, he believed she was a perpetual virgin. He doesn't actually understand that to be sinlessness. He actually understands that, as many Catholics believe, to be a title or a name given to Mary by the angel Gabriel, because he's unaware of any other time that is used in a as a name for an individual. But even in these homilies in Luke where he makes that statement, he also claims that Christ had to die for Mary's sin of doubt at the foot of the cross. And that's in these homilies on Luke 17, I believe. So trying to read like Kekartomene as like evidence, whether implicit or explicit, I just think it's a huge stretch. And also like the root word grace, charis, is actually in Kaotao. But if you read Gabriel's explanation of how Mary is graced or favored, it's because she was chosen to be the mother of Messiah. It says you have been graced or favored, charis, using the aorist tense as well, and explains it like you will be give birth to like Jesus, he will be the Son of the Most High and reign over the house of his father David in verses 30 to 32. So like how Mary is highly favored or graced is explained by Gabriel 2 verses later.
I see. Interesting.
And that's why, like, say, some Catholics will argue that at best it's consistent with the Immaculate Conception, but it doesn't go far enough to actually be decisive. And it kind of depends, like, say, if you hold to, say, material sufficiency of Scripture, you would really have to argue a lot on that and purported types. But, like, if you believe in partum partum, you can believe, like, well, the explication really comes, like, say, externally in, say, the patristic data and the conciliar documents in the early church and the lived liturgies as well. But
yeah, well, because then bear with me as I make this connection, but that would be sort of similarly to how the church can authoritatively decide the canon of Scripture, even though the apostles didn't like write out a list.
Do you believe that the canon is an apostolic tradition? Or do you believe it's a secondary object of infallibility?
I think it's the works produced come from the tradition of faith, right? And so in order to identify which things are a part of the tradition of faith and what can be like the main foundation to be staked upon, you need to have an identifier who can make that happen. Right. And so that would be the infallibility of the church, not only in the like capital T truth sense of like the theological implications, but also just the matter of fact that they're the mainstream bishops, right? They're the ones who are deciding it together. And again, there's the whole, some of the councils like Nicaea only had like a 12th of the bishops, right? But at the same time, it sort of melds with particularly the Catholic idea as opposed to the Orthodox that while the Patriarch of Rome, which was like, I hate having to sift through all this, even though Benedict retired that, wherever that figure is present and acts authoritatively with the other bishops present, that is sufficient to declare things infallible, so long as they're actually talked of as if they're infallible and as if not as if, and as they're at least evident within the early church. And again, it gets really weird because we don't have like a full everything that ever happened. Going so far back as saying like the bookend of John's gospel, whatever, everything that Christ did couldn't even be written down in all the books of the world idea, right? But then I guess I'm more in the favor of saying that what we have in the Bible is what we've collected of the things that have happened. It's not to say that like God intended there to be exactly this, right? Exactly this amount. I know that sounds kind of weird.
No, well, not really, because so I should ask this: would you agree? And again, I'm not trying to pick Catholic against Catholic, but like because there's some Catholics like Gary Michaud who's done a lot of work on the canon, the Deuter canon, and others like Breen and Sungenis, that at Trent in Florence as well, it only made a statement about what books that were being debated, which ones were canonical, but it's actually a theoretical possibility other books could be added to the canon in the future. Like, say, if there's a reunification with the Eastern Orthodox and some Eastern Orthodox accepts, say, Third Maccabees, it's a possibility, even if it's remote. Say, other books like Three Maccabees, for instance, could actually be added to the official Catholic canon.
Because that's just the Oriental Orthodox, though.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, but like in their books, they argue like Trent did not actually settle the question, like say the extent of the canon, only the books that were being debated at the time, and making a statement. And even some have argued that they passed over in silence the status of some other books as well, like the Esdras issue at Trent.
I mean, I don't feel as if that could work. I I guess I don't know.
Okay,
It seems
that's fine. If I'm not going to press you, but would it be fair to say like your position is the Catholic Church, of course, did not make the canon in the sense like say it actively clear this book is inspired, but it passively recognized which books were inspired at say Florence and or Trent, and its declaration is a binding declaration based on the infallibility and infectibility of the Church.
the first half is I think I agree with the second half, but the first half is a little touchy because it's to say that there doesn't exist anything talking about I guess the indefectibility of these other works or the origin of them, right? Like the primary issue, I believe, with the Didache was that they simply didn't know who'd authored it. They knew it had been someone sort of around St. Matthew's circles, but because they weren't sure of the level of teaching that was being given with in any degree, right? Hebrews, we have this, well, maybe it's St. Paul, but even back in the patristics, everyone's like, well, we're not sure, but it's totally orthodox, lowercase o, so it works.
Yeah.
Right. The Didache was sort of like a historical insight, and they were like, weighing.
Yeah, but that recognition did not make it inspired. Like God inspired a book, and in your view, the believing community came to recognize it. The recognition, though, does not make it inspired.
It's our epistemological know-how to know the capital T truth of inspired.
Yeah, basically the Church makes an epistemological status, but it doesn't. It's not the source of the ontology, if you will. The Church.
Right.
Not that the biblical authors were not members of a believing community, but like which perspective do you hold? Do you hold that Trent or Florence infallibly declared the biblical canon?
I mean, it's weird because I would
say there's differences between the two canons.
Hippo, Carthage, and Rome in the 4th century very much so established it, and that seems. But they
included Esdras, which Trent passed over.
Interesting. Okay. I haven't delved too much. Okay. I'm more of the early patristics guy. And so like Council of Trent sort of glazed over a little bit.
Fair enough. But like but you would agree, like say Carthage, Hippo were local councils, and even if you believe like say Rome did make a decision about the canon, it wasn't like as authoritative and binding, if you will, as what happened at Trent.
Sorry, I totally spaced out for a second there.
Would you agree, like, say, Trent at its 4th session actually made the dogmatic proclamation about the canon?
I think Trent likely did.
Okay.
I don't know the entirety of everything surrounding the full list. Because again, I haven't gotten too far into that. I'm relatively new into this, and I'm just pitching it.
Fair enough. If that's the case, I won't press you. But like, it's session 4 of Trent, April 1546. You're going to look at the Acta, and so forth. But no, that's fine. But I would just say, like, what you said about the canon. Even from a Catholic perspective, it's a bit different because, like, the Immaculate Conception, the substance in the Immaculate Conception goes back to the Apostolic era. The belief is like, even if it's not explicated in the Bible, it would be like, say, part of the deposits of faith. And according to, like, say, Vatican I, the Council of Trent, and other authoritative Catholic sources, especially Pius X, because he was huge into like arguing against the evolution of dogma.
Right.
All the dogmas, and beliefs, that are part and parcel of the deposit of faith was there in the 1st century. It's only up to the Church, like, say, to scientifically define and appreciate the doctrines and dogmas, and to pass them on through continuous succession, and that's the verbiage of the Council of Trent when it comes to like the tradition and scripture in the Church. It's not like, say, there's like a 500-year gap where no one knew about, like, say, certain things that were dogmas. Even in seed form, it was passed on faithfully. And because of its status, it's what's called the primary object infallibility. And yet I would just say like there's centuries of solids about this, and it's not simply like say Aquinas had questions about it. It's like it's more substantial than that. It's like the earliest patristics, even those who had a very high view of Mary, like you have like you mentioned Ephraim, like he believed that she was the mother of God. He believed that she was a perpetual virgin. He believed that she was Panagia, all holy from the Annunciation onwards, even paralleling, like, say, her personal holiness with that of Christ in the Nisabean hymns. Even then, he imputes personal sin to Mary before the Annunciation and believes that she was saved in the normative way through appropriating the grace of baptism and a host of other issues as well. And we're not talking about like insignificant individuals like Irenaeus, Justin, Ephraim, Chrysostom, and others. Were very important patristic commentators on the East and West throughout the centuries. So, I would just say that there's a problem, and there's others, but I don't want to like gish gobble, but like because I've done a lot of work in Mariology, it's a topic I actually like discussing, even like in non-polemical contexts. It's not simply like the bashing of the Romanists. It's an important theological topic, but right. I just believe, and if you kind of go through the article, like I even like document this from original sources, it's just not there. Now, one could appeal, let's say, typology and so forth, but like even in Aquinas would say you have to typology and arguments from fittingness, like it's more like a cherry on top. You have to prove the doctrine from, like, say, the ordinary means of faith, like the tradition, the ecumenical councils, and the scriptures. You can't prove a doctrine through typology or fittingness merely.
Right. Interesting. That's just, some stuff to chew on. And,
no, that's fine. I mean,
convene with all the kids.
No, that's
like,
fine.
All right, what do we think of this?
No, that's fine. Like, I'm not going to press you. Like, if you need, like, so if you need like time to like think about something, that's fine. I'm not going to press you.
Yeah. No. Cool. I guess to press in a little bit on you back. And again, this is me just asking questions. But how do you think of the Pearl of Great Price and the matter of fact that Joseph seemed to have actually believed that he was translating it, not receiving a sort of divine inspiration solely?
Well, I'm guessing you're talking about the Book of Abraham specifically, not the Pearl of Great Price, right. But I believe it's a false dichotomy. It's both. Yeah. He believed he was translating, but it was through a divine means because he did not believe he himself actually knew Egyptian.
Yeah, so the argument always is that Joseph Smith specifically was translating, but if you actually look at the Joseph Smith corpus of material and the way in which he is using the term translated, and the fact that he understands he does not know Greek, he does not know Hebrew, he doesn't know Egyptian, he doesn't know whatever the language is that appears on the gold plates, he is not believing that he's performing an academic translation of these documents. He is relying on, quote, the gift and power of God. So his use of translation is actually more interpreted in the church, especially through scholars that study this material, as a transmission. He is transmitting the text into English. He has no idea whether or not what appears on a papyrus or on the gold plates is exactly a word-for-word transmission of what he is portraying. But he would probably have believed that, certainly.
Well, couldn't he not believe that he didn't know these languages, yet believe that he was receiving a divine charism, I guess, to use a term.
So he would have believed, he would have believed that what he's receiving from God is what's on the page, certainly. That's the point.
So then how do you feel about
But he wouldn't have known that.
So you're saying he would have still taken it from the page, though?
No. So he did not know Egyptian, right? Right. So there was a recent video done by, what's his name? Cameron Bertuzzi. Yeah. So Cameron Bertuzzi, he did a terrible job of regurgitating a bunch of, for lack of a better word, a bunch of shitty arguments that have been made against the Pearl of Great Price for literally decades. And like a moron, rather than actually responding to the scholarship on the issues, he went and Googled a bunch of garbage and reiterated what the Tanners have been saying for 50 years. because he's not an actual scholar of anything. He's just a YouTube performer. But
Right.
anyways, the point being is that he represented the materials as this is an actual translation, using translation as Joseph Smith is affirming that he basically knows Egyptian. Well, anybody who knows anything about the material knows Joseph Smith is not claiming to have understood Egyptian characters, other than the ability to transmit into English something through the gift and power of God. In fact, if you watch Cameron Bertuzzi's video, I don't know if you've watched it, but if you go back and you actually watch it, it's funny because at the beginning of the video, he identifies himself as Joseph Smith is claiming to translate, quote, in the same manner he did the Book of Mormon. So the manner in which Joseph Smith claimed to have transmitted the Book of Mormon was through the gift and power of God. He is not claiming he understood or could decipher the characters. Now, that doesn't stop Joseph Smith from attempting an academic or scholarly understanding of the text, which he did. There's evidences that he did try to do that. But what we have from the journals that Cameron identified as being from Joseph Smith, they're not Joseph Smith. He's not writing those. What they are is it looks like they're an attempt by W. Phelps and others to reverse engineer. Basically, Joseph Smith produced this, and we're going to take this English and try to interpret it to match these characters. It's not Joseph Smith doing the other way around. And that's what current scholarship on those materials is pretty clearly demonstrating.
Just not to derail this, but like if you're interested in like Book of Abraham stuff, one of my best friends, Stephen Smoot, and a few others, including one of my co-workers who actually has a PhD in Egyptology, they contributed like a series of essays on the Book of Abraham that kind of goes into like detail about this. But yeah, I mean,
Latter-day Saints have been banging this drum for decades, and we've done a lot of. In fact, Stephen Smoot's a mutual friend of ours. He is done very, very deep dives into every aspect. I mean, they go into the words, the names, and the parallels with. In fact, Jacob Hansen, a friend of ours, also did a response video to Cameron's. But the point being is, Joseph Smith does not believe. Joseph Smith does not believe that he is able to translate in the way that we do from Greek into English or from Hebrew into English languages. He doesn't believe he can do that. In fact, when he lost the ability to translate, it's demonstrated in the Book of Mormon when there was a loss of the initial 116 or whatever pages. When those were lost, he lost the ability to translate and could not translate for a season. That right there is a historical indicator that he clearly had no ability to do anything with any characters or any ancient languages absent the ability that he had received from God as a divine investiture of power.
Okay.
So the fact that they think that we found these couple of scraps of papyrus and they're obviously what he got it from and that kind of stuff. Latter-day Saints, just those who understand and actually have taken the time to understand these issues, dismiss those arguments, because Cameron reaches these two absurd conclusions that, it's all decided. Everything's already conclusively decided one way or the other. So you're either sticking your head in the sand or you need to accept the fact that this is a false translation, which no, that's not what the scholarship actually reflects. We don't have to do that.
Interesting. So then like for the same things, like, because I've heard of bits of like the Joseph Smith translation mimicking the same, I guess, wording and mistranslations that scholars would say the King James Bible did of the originals.
Well, the JST is like it's multifaceted thing. In some cases, it's Joseph Smith with his King James, armed with like say modern revelation, expanding upon the biblical text, like his vision that is section 76, him adding telestial to 1 Corinthians 15. Sometimes like him just like making sense in a 19th century English perspective of some obscure biblical verses in King James English. And sometimes like some of it seems like, say, the Melchizedek material or the Book of Moses stuff that's canonized in the Pro-Great Price being received through Revelation. So there's like the JST is like a hodgepodge, for lack of a better term, of various things that are going on. Now, I don't buy it, but there's a perspective like at times he was influenced through some means by Adam Clarke, who was a known biblical commentator, and that kind of is reflective in some of the variations in the JST as well. So, and sometimes like it seems to be like Joseph was working on the JST, but he kind of realized he was in error and he did a 180. For instance, he was going through, like, say, a lot of the biblical texts that speak about a plurality of gods, and he kept changing it to like God singular until he kind of realized, like, no, there's something in this plurality of gods thing after all. And this was when he was starting Hebrew as well, realizing, like, say, the nuances of Elohim. And there's a host of other things as well. Like, it's one of the more complex things because you have this kind of naive view. It's a pure textual restoration, or it's purely pilfering from the Adam Clarke commentary and stuff like that. But there seems to be like a you would have to work on it, like, say, on the text by text, variant by variant basis to like sift what's going on when it comes to the entire JST project. Like about 2 years ago, I actually went through like the handwritten scans of the handwritten texts of the Old and New Testament manuscripts, and it's a really complex beast one is dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine.
Well, yeah, LDS scholarship is actually quite robust, and I think that one of the mistakes that critics make is that they oversimplify a lot of the issues, and
Yeah.
what they do, and by doing so, they ignore the volume of material. So, for example, they'll say there are King James errors in the Book of Mormon. Okay, let's grant that. That means that he copied a King James version of the Bible. Let's say that he did that, and then he copied it into a Book of Mormon for some section that's being reflecting exactly what is identified in the King James version. Okay, that's fine. Except that in a lot of these passages, especially in Isaiah passages, there are changes, there are alterations that are made. With respect to the Sermon on the Mount, for example, in 3rd Nephi, there are changes, there's modifications that are made to the text. So not only is he copying things apparently, but he's also making modifications to the text for specific theological purposes within that specific context. But also, too, that doesn't account for the entire Book of Mormon, which has an enormous amount of other original materials which reflect a whole bunch of issues and ideas that have been developed in later scholarship that comes after Joseph Smith's lifetime. So the thing is that the idea is convoluted, but to say, hey, there's this
Right.
issue right here, copied a problem, let's ignore everything else. And that's commonly what happens with the Book of Abraham. They're looking at how it was produced, and they ignore the text. And Jacob Hansen, at the end of his video, he actually did 2 videos, but at the end of his video, he does a very good job identifying for about 6 or 7 minutes several issues that are reflected in the Book of Abraham that have been affirmed by scholarship that was produced after the fact. Texts, documents, and things like that have been discovered that actually support what is contained in the Book of Abraham. So if the Book of Abraham is simply, and that's why they have to get around it, is they have to kind of say, he made it all up. Ignore the text. Don't read it, because it's not what's contained in these fragments. That's their hope. And most people who buy that argument, again, are eating a very simplistic, superficial argument, which I think is disingenuous. If you're going to be honest and you're going to be sincere, you have to do more of a deep dive and actually evaluate the actual text and the scholarship surrounding it.
Right.
Because they don't do that with the Bible, especially if they stay believers. I mean, if you're a believer, you don't just do that with the Bible. You don't just say, hey, one passage here, superficially, unless you're a Protestant.
Although I didn't notice, like, you did laugh when we mentioned Cameron Bertuzzi, so I'm not sure if you're a fan or not of him, but yeah.
Oh,
Okay, yeah.
To be honest, there's a lot of times I'm like, wow, this is some real pop Catholicism.
So my issue
so fervent for a convert who doesn't know that much about what he's talking about.
Oh my! Did you see like his conversion story on Pints with Aquinas when they're outside the Vatican?
Oh, I think so.
He did not even know what the rosary was.
That's crazy work.
Yeah, because he was saying. By the way, this is not a bash on Catholicism. We have our bad converts as well, but he was this kind of celebrity convert. Personally, I think he's a grifter. Like when he announced he wanted to become Catholic, Mac Fad flied him over to the Vatican so they could chat outside St. Peter's Basilica in the background.
Yeah.
And like, oh yeah, he was saying like how he's really attracted to the Roman Catholic prayer life. And as a Catholic, what is the most obvious, well-known type of prayer that's said on
The
a regular?
rosary.
It's the rosary.
It's obviously the joke key. I don't know what you're talking
He did not
about.
even know it.
Yeah, I've participated in the rosary about I don't know how many dozens of times.
We're not talking about like some kind of obscure. Yeah, we're not talking about some kind of obscure practice like amongst Mongolian Catholics from the 1400s he likes.
Yeah, I have attended funerals and masses for friends and all kinds of stuff where we pray the rosary. I don't know how you could not be aware of the rosary. If you know anything about Catholicism, people carry around this little thing called the rosary. Wrapped around. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, would you look at that?
Yeah, but I just kind of noticed. I was like, okay, he's not going to be the biggest fan, so that's good.
And my big issue is if you're a Catholic, just teach Catholicism. Like I don't like it when people make anti-videos of anything. Like, I don't see any reason. If you want to have a discussion with somebody who's not of your faith and sit and contrast and question their reasoning, that's fine. But what I don't like is, I don't like people who do what he did, where he's produced, 3 or 4 kind of let's crap on Mormons or whatever. I don't understand that. That doesn't accomplish anything.
He also refuses debate LDS.
He won't. Yeah. In fact, he offers up somebody else as a proxy to debate for him, which shows that he probably doesn't know what he's talking about or doesn't have the confidence in what he's saying to do it. But it's not just him. Lots of people do this kind of crap. I don't like it with Latter-day Saints do it either. I don't like when Latter-day Saints go and they crap on somebody else's theology. It's not necessary. But
there's been a large swath of people who I think only within the past 5 years have started to, I guess, take the Mormons seriously.
Well, it's not even that. It's just they found that Mormons are a smaller group within the broader scope of what you would call Christianity. And I think that they know that we have unusual beliefs when compared to most Orthodox Christians. We have some very, very clear differences in things that we believe. There's a lot of ignorance about what we believe, so it's easy to straw man and make superficial arguments about our theology without really anything. It's easy to laugh at us. Joseph Smith was a con man and make these stupid arguments. But engaging with the scholarship, they never do. And so actually what they're doing, for those of us who are faithful members, they're just making us double down on our adherence to it, to our own theology, because you're like, you're not even representing it correctly. All you're doing is making a complete parody. And my favorite thing about Cameron's video, which I think highlights how absurd it was, is at the end he says, and now we know Christianity's true. He makes some comment to that, like, real Christianity is true. Because of this video I did crapping on the Book of Abraham, the real Christian, the thing is that that's the problem. He doesn't present what he believes and arguments to support it. He craps on some aspect of somebody else's beliefs and then defaults back to the position. And Robert says it all the time. Even if I'm wrong, even if Latter-day Saint theology, the church is false, it's completely a fraud, that doesn't make Roman Catholicism true. It's not by default you're right. It's not by default Protestants are right. You have to still reinforce and support, and that's why Robert says, on your own terms, on your own standards. And if you're going to maintain a position that this is the way it is, it has to be maintained consistently throughout the entire narrative that describes your theology.
And personally, I think during the some Catholics are actually in damage control, because I'm not sure if you saw the debate between Jacob Hansen and Trent Horn on the Book of Mormon back in August.
It was atrocious.
Many Catholics actually thought Jacob won. I'm friends with Jacob, but I'm biased.
I'm also in that in line with the whole.
And that's like Trent is a very smart guy, but I've been reaching out to him. I even offered to debate him on the Immaculate Conception a few weeks ago, and he's refused. So but like he's a smart guy. He's not an idiot, but like he did a really bad job. It was a gift gallop, and he embarrassed himself. And he's one of the best Rome has at the moment, at least in terms of popular level apologetics.
Right.
And I do honestly believe they're on damage control mode. So
Yeah. No, I mean, that's definitely, I think that was probably the one that opened my eyes probably the most. Um,
yeah, because I actually helped Jacob prep for that debate. I used to live in Utah for a few years, and he actually flew over to meet me and Blake Oster to like talk shop, and I was on the phone with him for like a few hours each week in preparation for that debate because it was a big debate. Um, I was expecting more from Trent.
yeah, no, me too. I
No,
was
I
like,
expected
dude,
a
please,
lot.
bro.
I was actually concerned. My advice to Jacob was not to do it. I'm like, dude, that's not a good idea. He's very good when it comes to both debate and Roman Catholicism. The problem with it is twofold. Is one, I think the topic was terrible. I think that was a horrible topic. And is the what was it? Is the Book of Mormon
Is the Book of Mormon
scripture?
inspired?
Is the Book of Mormon inspired? Which I don't even understand how you debate that, but whatever. So even so, Trent didn't even debate that. Again, it was kind of the
It was basically
uh,
bash on Joseph Smith and make Mormonism
yeah,
like batshit
yeah. It's just
crazy.
like Joseph Smith was this, so ergo, Book of Mormon can't be
Yeah,
inspired.
and this is the complaint I have. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, Mormonism is batshit crazy, and it's on the same level as, say, the Flat Earth. If you can be interacting though with, say, the other side, you show them respect by engaging with the best arguments they have, even if you think the system is lousy. It's like I disagree strongly with Roman Catholicism. I don't think Roman Catholicism is in on the same level as Flat Earth. Don't worry. But I think Roman Catholicism is wrong.
Appreciate that.
But yeah, welcome. No bar, but yeah. But I think Roman Catholicism is wrong. But I I have enough integrity to deal with the best, as opposed to
Right.
like say really lousy TikTok level really crappy apologetics, which I'm sure you've come across as well, which kind of makes you just cringe. It's like, no, that dude,
And
no.
now we get it in the form of Peter Griffin explaining it, and it's awful. Have you seen
Well,
that?
it's kind of like uh-uh,
The new addition to
uh-uh.
apologetics is you just have like there's Imam Peter or there's Pope Peter the Second
Oh,
or
yeah.
this and they're like, well, actually, no, this is wrong, and here's why. And I'm gonna act as a talking figurehead while there's like Minecraft parkour playing in the
Oh
background.
God.
No,
It's
I've
so
seen some of
awful.
the Minecraft. That's just cringe. But you know what I'm talking about. So like, again, they don't extend the courtesy that we do. I mean, Jacob, for an amateur, he has no background in theology or languages. He did a way better job against Trent, who has 3 earned master's degrees.
Right.
And no, I'm not saying like that proves the Book of Mormon and that
Oh yeah,
disproves
for
Roman
sure. But
Catholicism, but it does kind of show like and this is not aimed at you, but like if Roman apologists want to be taken seriously by Latter Day Saints, do the damn diligence and just kind of treat us with respect.
Yeah,
Like,
I
and
mean
don't get me
it's
wrong, like, and by the way, like I think you've been very respectful throughout this, so it's not like a shot against you. It's just like
yeah,
your
no,
bigger things
totally.
in the debaters. Like I was scheduled to debate Jimmy Aiken, but he was insistent we had to debate the entire LDS canon in one debate, and he wanted to throw out all these arguments in a 15-minute opening statement.
it was yeah.
Yeah.
So
Even after I said I would happily debate and defend the authenticity of the Book of Abraham, because he's done a lot of work on that,
yeah.
as I
And
have. So
one of the things that from a more focused study perspective that I've noticed, one of the things that's helped me because as I've struggled with just general belief and faith in God throughout my life, that's kept me focused on remaining LDS is the fact that people who are opponents to it, the arguments to that, are usually incredibly superficial and two-dimensional, or they're outright lies. And so I figure, why would you have to lie about a faith in order to disprove it? Shouldn't you be able to just tell the truth, and it should just, truth will out, kind of what I think it's Gamaliel in Acts said, that it'll just destroy itself eventually. Just leave it alone, let it run its course, and it'll fall apart. And that's kind of the perspective that I had. But if you have to willfully lie, so I've read a lot of anti-Mormon books, literature, articles, materials, and they're full of misrepresentations or very shallow scholarship in order to kind of prove that point. Again, I'm not saying that proves it's true. It doesn't. But the point being is that that's kind of what they try to do. The Gish Gallop argument is the most common that I see. And that's why I was so just kind of disappointed that Trent Horn did that. I mean, it was like, that's what I would expect an idiot off of TikTok or something who decides to debate Mormonism to do. Oh, well, did you know, or my favorite is, did you know that in Revelations it said that if any man shall add to or take away, that, you can't have an open canon, right?
Yeah,
Or,
Robert,
or,
last time we
or
talked.
even he's like the Catholic Church is true, ergo the Book of Mormon is false. It's like, wow,
Yes.
wait, they some Carson Bacon, but yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
I
that was the
okay,
worst
so
argument.
two things. Last time we talked about the Revelation thing, and I was like, dude, I throw this bone to you guys every single time I talk with the Protestants, right? They're like,
Yeah.
well, they don't understand. I'm like, well, technically speaking, they're right. So he's the brakes on that one.
You might notice, like, funny enough, that's sometimes a text that's actually used against Catholics as well. Sometimes, you know who Norman Geisler is? He's deceased, but he was a well-known Protestant. You know, he wrote the book Catholics and Evangelicals. He and others sometimes actually use that text to show sola scriptura, ergo no such thing as authoritative oral tradition after the New Testament. I kid you not, it's actually been used against Catholic theology as well, and it's just as lame.
No, yeah, and I think that's in large part where I was like, okay, let's look into that. Like, is that a fair thing? And then it's like, okay, the Greek is vivion, and you have
it's singular,
an independent work. So obviously, this only has to deal with the Book of Revelation.
Exactly.
Well, even a really common anti-Mormon detractor named Bill McKeever did a short clip where he says, "Look, stop using this verse for that purpose." I think the Mormons are right. Like it's only talking about the Book of Revelation, and he goes on and he says there's other reasons why the LDS Church is not true, but this is not a good argument.
It's basically an argument that just will not die. It's like the really silly Petra argument, which you probably hear all the time. Like I think that's on an exegetical level what that is. On a linguistic level, the Petra argument is like, no, even if you want to argue that way, you have to do more than just like simply claim that, and I
just fall back on the, well, that's tough because John Calvin also thought that it was not any different. So
yeah,
I mean, if you want to subscribe to his systematic theology, I'm just going to take that as that's probably a good representative of your case. So that, I don't know, that's just all I gotta say. No, there's a Reformed Baptist old guy, like maybe 60 or so, who is in our student union, and like never before, like when you said this sort of not understanding the doctrines and really harping people on it has made you all double down. He's done that, but with the Catholics of the University of Wyoming.
It's not good. It's not a very good idea. So I attended the University of Utah for my undergraduate degree. And when I was up there, we had people that would do that. They would come on campus and they would do these campus for Christ crusade type things. And they actually would maintain that the reason that they would flood into Utah at the time was because it was the least Christian state in the United States was Utah. It had the fewest Christians of any state. And I thought, but for a lot of Latter-day Saints, that just sounds so stupid. Like, that's just such a dumb claim to make. They're not going to listen to you.
I would love to put an asterisk on my little poster and have like Nicene down at the bottom.
Yes, that's okay. Like, if you're going to claim we're not Christian, that's fine, but just make sure you're doing it on theological grounds. Just simply like saying they're not Christian simpliciter, it's rather deceptive because what does that give you the impression? They don't believe in Jesus, they don't believe in atonement, they don't have like anything that they don't accept New Testament revelation.
Even the whole different Jesus stuff. Again, it causes Latter-day Saints most of their eyes to glaze over. They don't understand the subtle nuance of what you're trying to argue because you've already said something that's so patently absurd in the minds of a Latter-day Saint. So rather than engaging in these kind of superficial, stupid polemics, you ought to probably form a more substantive, coherent argument and present it in a better way that's not going to cause people to double down on their own faith if your attempt is to try to get them to abandon it. I don't know. That's just what I think, but who knows? I'm just one guy. So let's have another discussion. I'd love to talk to you some more, but I've got to go personally.
No, you're good. I should
promise my son.
And it's almost 9 p.m. my time, so I need to get some stuff ready for tomorrow. So
I will be. Is it 8:47 or 9:47 for you?
It is 8:47 for me.
Okay, I'll be an hour ahead of you starting 2 days from now. So,
where are you going?
Italia.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so gonna be
Sweet.
studying over, I guess, what the Catholics might call the motherland or something like that. Our version of Mecca. Um, Not quite Rome, but Milan. So for
Oh, nice.
someone as Augustine as his patron saint, might as well be.
How long will you be studying there?
Probably 3, almost 4 months.
Oh, nice, nice.
So it's gonna be my full second semester. They just
Cool.
start way later.
No, and I would encourage you between now and the time we meet again, just read the Book of Mormon. Just read the whole thing. You'll be fine. Awesome. And you can tell us how it's not biblical.
Or you can do us a favor, just like translate to ecclesiastical Latin, save us the time to do that.
Yeah, just do that.
That would be crazy work. That would be so funny. It's probably been done before, but if it hasn't, that would almost be fun.
I don't recall any ecclesiastical Latin translation. That's the thing.
No,
So
no, I don't think so.
That would definitely
I don't
be
know
a
that there's a
time.
Latin translation of the Book of Mormon. What
I mean,
function would there be?
considering 1 and 8 verses are practically just the King James, I can just rip from the Dewey Reams.
Oh, I know. Yeah. It's all of them. Yeah. So, and that's my problem with that argument is it's just like he's like he copied it directly except for where he doesn't. Oh, he doesn't? Yeah. So again, you just didn't pay attention to what the argument is. So yeah, whatever.
Anyway.
plagiarized, but he plagiarized from Jerome's handwritten original Vulgate.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah. What does he know? So, anyways, it was nice seeing you again, Ramsey.
Yeah, nice to talk to you guys.
Nice to talk to you.